Chile is 4,300 kilometers long and on average only 177 kilometers wide, which means that if you laid it across Europe, it would reach from the north of Norway all the way down into the Sahara while staying narrower than most people drive in a single week. It is the strangest shaped country on Earth, and almost nothing inside it makes any sense either, because this is a place that holds the driest desert on the planet and one of the largest ice fields outside Antarctica at the same time. These are 40 geography facts about Chile that sound completely made up, and every one of them is real. Start with the shape because everything else follows from it. Chile stretches across 38 degrees of latitude, which is more than any other country manages in one unbroken strip. And it covers the same north to south range as the distance from Scotland to Senegal. At its narrowest point, the country is only about 90 kilometers wide, so you could drive from the Pacific Ocean to the Argentine border in under 2 hours. And at its widest, it still barely passes 350. The border it shares with Argentina runs for more than 5,000 kilometers, which makes it the third longest land border on Earth, and almost all of it simply follows the crest of the Andes. That wall of mountains is the only reason Chile exists as a separate country, because for most of its history, crossing the Andes was far harder than crossing the ocean. Chile has more than 6,000 kilometers of Pacific coastline, and every single major city sits on it because there is no interior for one to sit in. Almost everyone in Chile lives in one narrow slice of it. Between the desert in the north and the ice in the south, there is a stretch of about 1,000 kilometers called the Central Valley, where the climate turns Mediterranean, and this is where roughly 80% of the population sits. Santiago alone holds about a third of the entire country, and it sits in a bowl with the Andes on one side and a coastal range on the other, which traps the air so effectively that the city has some of the worst winter smog in the Americas, despite having very little heavy industry. The same Mediterranean climate that makes the valley livable also made it one of the great wine regions on Earth. And Chilean vineyards ended up with an accidental superpower because the phylloxera louse that destroyed almost every vineyard in Europe during the 1800s never managed to cross the Atacama and never managed to cross the Andes. That means Chile still grows vines on their own original roots, while most of Europe has to graft onto American ones. There is even a grape called Carmenere that was believed extinct in France for over a century until somebody worked out that a large part of what Chile had been selling as Merlot was actually the lost variety growing quietly on the other side of the world. Now, go to the top of the country and you reach the Atacama, which is the driest place on Earth outside the poles. Some weather stations there have never recorded a single drop of rain in the entire time anyone has been measuring, and there are riverbeds that have been dry for more than 100,000 years. The reason is a double trap, because the Andes block every cloud coming from the Amazon in the east, while the cold Humboldt Current running up the coast kills off rain from the Pacific in the west, so the Atacama is squeezed dry from both directions at once. The soil there is so lifeless and so similar to the surface of Mars that NASA tests rovers in it, and film crews shoot Mars scenes there without changing anything. Mummies have been found in the Atacama that are around 2,000 years older than the oldest Egyptian ones, and they survived only because nothing there ever rots. And then every few years the rain does arrive and the whole desert erupts into flowers across hundreds of kilometers in an event Chileans call the Desierto Florido. The same desert holds the reason Chile matters to the rest of the world, because underneath it sits roughly a quarter of all the copper on the planet. Chuquicamata is one of the largest open pit mines ever dug, and the hole is more than 4 kilometers long and 800 meters deep. Chile also holds a huge share of the world's lithium and salt flats that look like frozen white lakes, and the same dryness that killed everything else is exactly what makes the mineral deposits so rich. Go south from the desert and the country catches fire. Chile sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, and it has around 2,900 volcanoes, of which roughly 90 are still active, which is one of the highest concentrations anywhere. Ojos del Salado on the Argentine border is the highest active volcano on Earth at 6,893 meters. and it has a crater lake near the summit that is the highest body of water in the world. Villarrica is one of only a handful of volcanoes anywhere that keeps a permanent lake of molten lava in its crater, and you can walk up to the rim and look straight down into it. In 1960, the town of Valdivia was hit by the most powerful earthquake ever recorded anywhere on Earth at magnitude 9.5. And it was so violent that it dropped parts of the coastline by 2 meters and sent a tsunami all the way across the Pacific to Japan more than 22 hours later. That single earthquake released more energy than every other earthquake of the 20th century combined, and Chile has simply learned to live on top of this. Chilean building codes are now among the strictest on the planet, which is why a magnitude 8.8 quake in 2010 killed a fraction of the people that far weaker quakes kill elsewhere. Keep going south and the fire turns into ice. Chile holds roughly 80% of all the glaciers in South America, and the southern Patagonian ice field is the largest mass of ice in the southern hemisphere outside Antarctica itself. It is so large and so remote that parts of the border with Argentina inside it have still never been formally agreed. Which means there is a stretch of frontier on this planet that is genuinely undefined because nobody can practically go there. Torres del Paine sits in this region and its towers are granite, pushed up from below, and then carved by ice into shapes that look artificial. Further south, the land breaks apart completely into thousands of islands and fjords and channels so tangled that the coastline of Chile measured properly is many times longer than the country itself. Punta Arenas down here is one of the southernmost cities on Earth, and beyond it lies Tierra del Fuego, which Chile splits with Argentina, and then Cape Horn, where the Atlantic and the Pacific collide in some of the roughest water sailors ever named. Chile does not stop at the coast either. Easter Island belongs to Chile, and it sits 3,700 kilometers out in the Pacific, which makes it one of the most isolated inhabited places in the world. And the nearest other inhabited island is still more than 2,000 kilometers beyond that. Chile took it in 1888, and the people there are closer to Polynesia than to South America, in every way except the passport. The Juan Fernandez Islands also belong to Chile, and one of them is the island where a Scottish sailor called Alexander Selkirk was marooned for 4 years, which is the story that became Robinson Crusoe. Chile also claims 1.25 million square kilometers of Antarctica, which is larger than the entire mainland country, and it maintains permanent bases down there, including one with a school and a post office. Add all of that together, and Chile controls a stretch of the planet, running from 17 degrees south all the way to the South Pole. The shape of Chile also created one of the longest running grudges in South America. Until the 1880s, Bolivia had a coastline and a working port on the Pacific, and then it lost every meter of it to Chile in the War of the Pacific, which was fought largely over the nitrate sitting in that same rainless desert. Bolivia has been landlocked ever since, and it has never accepted the loss, which is why the country still maintains a navy of several thousand people who train on Lake Titicaca, and why Bolivians still mark a national day every year for a sea their country has not touched in more than a century. That same war handed Chile the copper and the nitrate that funded the modern state, so the driest ground on the planet turned out to be the most valuable land in the region. And then Chile did something else that quietly redrew the map of the world, because in 1947 it claimed control of the ocean 200 nautical miles out from its own coast in order to protect the fisheries that the Humboldt Current feeds. That claim was treated as outrageous at the time, and it slowly became the 200-mile exclusive economic zone that almost every coastal nation on Earth now uses. A country shaped like a ribbon effectively rewrote who owns the oceans. There is one more thing that Chile quietly owns, and it is the sky. The Atacama sits at high altitude under air so dry and so still and so free of light that it is the best place on Earth to look at space from the ground. Roughly 40% of the world's telescope power already sits in northern Chile, and once the observatories now being built are finished, that share climbs past half. The Alma Array up on the Chanantor Plateau works at 5,000 meters, where the air is so thin that engineers carry oxygen while they work on it. When astronomers photographed a black hole for the first time, part of that image was captured from a Chilean desert that has not seen rain in living memory. So why does any of this exist in one country? The answer is that Chile is not really a country shaped by people at all, but a country shaped by a subduction zone because the Nazca Plate is sliding underneath South America at about 8 centimeters a year, and it has been doing that for tens of millions of years. That collision built the Andes, and the Andes trapped the rain. And the trapped rain made the desert, and the same collision made the volcanoes and the earthquakes. And it lifted the coast, and it left a strip of habitable land pinned between a mountain wall and an ocean. Chile is what happens when a country is drawn not by treaties, but by a crack in the surface of the planet. And that is the part worth sitting with. We tend to think borders are decisions that somebody made in a room, and most of them are. But this one was decided by geology long before anybody arrived to argue about it. And the result is a country that contains a desert where it never rains, and an ice field the size of a small nation, and the highest volcano on Earth, and the most powerful earthquake ever recorded, and an island so far out in the Pacific that its nearest neighbor is nobody at all. So which one of those actually surprised you the most? Drop it in the comments because I read every single one. And if you want more of this, I make one every week, so subscribe and I will see you in the next one.